Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another SnodaReel. I'm your host, BlackChat56, and I'm joined by awesome Bin Boy, my buddy Benji. And today we're going to go ahead and talk about what we would consider a modern horror masterpiece. So
Oof.
I'm going to go ahead and let my buddy over here, I'm going to let him
Yeah.
kind of talk about what he would consider, what would be like his guidelines for it, and what he would consider is a modern horror masterpiece. Go right ahead,
Well,
Benji.
well, first of all, what do you consider modern? Because if we're gonna go off like every 10 years, we're gonna start from 2000s to 2010, or 2010 to 2020, or 2020 till now.
I would say from let's see I would say the heyday of horror would probably be the 70s and the 80s. Would you agree?
Yes.
So I would say whether there's a 90s horror movie that didn't get enough recognition and would be considered more of a I would say from like the 90s up until current day. That would be considered
90s till
modern.
current day.
It's a
Okay, 90s
long
till
list, I
current
know.
day. That's opening up the range
Exactly.
for all those movies. Plus masterpiece. That's a big word. Very
It
big word.
is. Yeah, and it's a word that shouldn't be used lightly. I do agree with you on that.
Hmm.
But it's like this is your interpretation, and anybody that's going to be commenting, it's their interpretation, all that fun stuff. So go right ahead. What would be your guidelines? Then we can go into what you would consider.
Well, if you're gonna with masterpiece, like I said, that's a big word. So
Mm,
if and horror is actually a oblique genre, not oblique, but it's pretty much a crazy genre because you
mm,
can create horror with anything. You it
true.
sometimes you don't even it doesn't have to be good for anyone to enjoy horror movies. I mean, you got movies
That is
like
true.
Thanksgiving, Killer Clowns, and the
Those
Basket
are movies
Case. You
that
got
know. Those are movies that know they're bad movies.
okay, that's a fair point, yeah. But then you
Yeah.
got yeah, but
Mm,
regardless. So if anything, I have to consider a masterpiece. Like it has to involve acting, great acting by any actor. You don't need an A-list actor. It could be
mm,
A to Z.
mm,
And then you got that. And then you got a soundtrack that could just that isn't a soundtrack. It has to be ambient necessarily.
okay. Right.
And honestly, I think that's pretty much it. No, that's not it. Plot is something that's pretty important too.
Correct.
Yeah, because you gotta have the right one. It's because like I said, horror is just this big genre that can go bad and can go good, and it can be enjoyable either way.
Mm,
Now, what can I consider a masterpiece?
mhm,
That's actually a really tough one
mm.
because when I
Hence the
think
reason I picked the big
masterpiece,
brain questions.
because when I think masterpiece, I immediately go straight to Psycho.
Psycho is a good one. That is definitely a horror masterpiece for sure.
Definitely,
I would say
definitely.
The Shining is another masterpiece. Jaws isn't necessarily
Yes,
a horror movie, but it, it,
it.
it falls so neatly in line with it.
I can actually argue that it does. It is a horror movie. I can actually argue that
Okay.
it falls under the genre of horror. It's a
Okay.
creature feature, so and it has all
Right.
the and this it has all the elements of horror. It has build up. It's got tension. The soundtrack is a
Mm.
good horror
Yeah.
soundtrack
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, those are definitely masterpieces of their time for sure.
for other
Again,
time.
80s, 70s and 80s absolutely, like I said, would be like the gold mine of horror. The 70s would most likely be your giallo films, which are most of your Italian horror, like the slasher, basically. But
Yeah,
Psycho came out in what, the 60s, if I'm not mistaken.
60s. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yep.
I mean, you have that kind of broadening everything else. Like, of course, you have the classic Universal horror monsters, but that's
Yeah.
that's different. It's just one of those things. It's like it is a hard guideline to kind of come up with from like 90s till now, and I
Yeah.
would
Definitely.
say right now you're definitely seeing, like, in the past 5 or 6 years or so, you are seeing a lot more horror get embraced, and I do enjoy that. However, it's hard to find one that's like 100% good or 100% enjoyable, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And like you and I both saw Infinity Pool, and
Yep.
yeah, I wouldn't argue that's really a horror movie. I would say that's really a thriller than anything else, but it's definitely got horror elements in it. And
A lot of
you
horror
you
for
really
sure.
enjoyed it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you really enjoyed it. I was kind of on the fence about it. I was like, I don't know how I feel about it. I expected more and less at the same time. So it was just one of those things like, okay, it's definitely something I'll never forget, but it's also one of those things I don't know if I would go out of my way to go see it. Whereas you said, oh yeah, I definitely want to go see this again. Which, by the way, it is on DVD soon this week. I believe
Oh,
it came out.
great! I am totally buying it.
Yes, yeah. Well, at least it's on digital. I don't know about physical, but that's besides the point. I know I roll my eyes at digital too, but you know,
Yeah.
I would have to say definitely I have the same guidelines where it's like you got to have the right amount of suspense, the right amount of horror. You got to have
Hmm.
the right acting. You got to have the right directing. I would argue you have to have the right writing, which does kind of fall into the same
Yes.
lines of story. But you
Hmm.
can have a great story and terrible dialogue. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Oh yeah.
And you know, you definitely have that element of it. I would argue that The Conjuring would be close to a horror masterpiece, and as of terms of modern, from '90s till now. I would say the Conjuring is a really good one. If you want to go for one that genuinely impressed me, it would be Insidious. I wouldn't consider it a masterpiece, but it's definitely one of those. Definitely, like I will never forget watching that.
See, because here's another point. Because horror is one of those genres that has different subgenres.
True, horror can
So,
be a horror comedy. You can go into horror
mhm,
suspense. You can go into horror romance. I think there is horror romance
mhm.
out there. I don't know.
Shaun of the Dead, Warm Bodies.
That's more horror rom com, which is like three genres in one.
Okay, yeah.
I would
Okay,
argue.
yeah.
I would argue Warm Bodies isn't really a horror movie. I would argue it's just a rom com with zombies. That's really all it is.
Okay.
Which you could argue Shaun of the Dead is too. But Shaun of the Dead knew when to be serious, knew when to be scary, and knew when to be funny.
Hmm.
And I argue, I would say that is a masterpiece in my also in my opinion because I love Edgar Wright. I feel like for the first like big film he ever did, Shaun of the Dead, I would argue is if you're just getting into horror, I feel like that would be one of the best ones to kind of introduce somebody into. Be like, yeah, this is going towards the
Yeah.
hardcore gore and everything else like that, but this still has a light tone. There's definitely some heavy hitters, like especially in Bar when his mom, uh,
Yeah.
with all that, and I mean that's hard hitting for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean you know that's a good. I would say that's a good element, you know, but we're not talking strictly horror. We're just talking about anything that happens to have horror in it, in its primary focus, but
Uh huh.
balances itself out. So, like, I know a lot of you liked a lot of A24 films. I know you liked
Yeah.
Hereditary, Midsummer. I don't
Hmm.
know if you liked The Witch, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember if you
The
said
Witch
anything
was
about
actually
it.
honestly that one was a lot better than Lighthouse. I will admit. Cause
Okay,
yeah, cause yeah, cause I keep going with any modern masterpieces. I keep thinking of lots of A24 movies.
that is true. A24 does a lot of really good things. I would argue I don't know. X is interesting because I'm going off of like A24. That was their first
Hmm.
attempt at a slasher. And I have yet to see Pearl. It's on my to-do list. I've just yet to do it. And I know Maxine's coming out soon as well.
Yeah.
I believe it's supposed to come out this year, if not maybe next year.
Hope so.
Hopefully. And so, you know, I would say that's a good one. I would argue Scream is technically a masterpiece from Wes Craven, just because it so encaptured the 90s as well as it was an homage to horror movies. It blatantly made sure that you knew which movies it was homaging, even with the character names like Billy Loomis, Stu Macher, uh, all that stuff like that. Like, you know, Harold, you know, all that fun
Hmm.
stuff. And I would argue that that's a I thoroughly enjoy Scream, even though I wasn't around in the '90s. I mean, I was around there the last bit of it, last 4 months. But you know, beyond that, I can't really. But I grew up with a lot of '90s stuff, so I would say
Hmm.
Scream is a really good one. Uh, it just depends on everybody's taste, but I would argue Scream would be a masterpiece because it's damn near perfect. I can't think of anything that really doesn't work in Scream. Um, Another one
I
would
don't know.
definitely be The
It's
Conjuring.
because I can see Conjuring, but with Scream, it's just because it pays homage to a lot of things. I can't really classify that as masterpiece because they're not going off any original concepts. If they're doing so much homages to so many things.
I would argue maybe not, because you do have the twist that it's not one, but it's two killers.
Okay, yeah, okay,
I would
that's a fair
argue
point.
and it also revitalized the slasher genre. So you can go with that as well. Um, it would I would argue that 100%, because it's also, it is an homage, but so is Cabin in the Woods, and I argue that is one of the best love hate letters to horror ever existing.
Yeah, definitely, yeah, for
So
sure.
it's like, yeah, no, you fucked up. You fucked up. You do some fucked up shit, but I love you. And that's essentially what Cabin in the Woods is saying to horror. It's like, you've done some stupid fucked up shit, but I love you. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I like that. And I would argue the only reason why I don't consider Cabin in the Woods a masterpiece is because it spends so much time just being a generic slasher. It's
Yep,
not. It
definitely.
really becomes a masterpiece in my eyes if it were to be labeled one. It really becomes a masterpiece once they stop that. Like when they go
Hmm.
full forward into what it actually is. Like you go full forward into the facility. You go full like balls to the wall with the creatures and everything else like that. It's not just references. It's actual creatures. You go balls to the wall with gore, balls to the wall with practical and CGI. You end the way it ended. I mean, like I would say that is masterclass right there, because it just shows literally makes everything fly at you, and you don't expect it coming. So it's just one of those things. Like I would still argue The Conjuring is definitely a masterpiece. Conjuring 2 is a little bit more. I say it does elevate it, but it's not as good. I will never
Hmm.
forget the first time I watched The Conjuring. Conjuring 2, maybe not. That's kind of my thought process on it, at least. Um,
Okay, a couple other movies that are starting to bounce around in my head for a masterpiece
right.
is Saw.
Saw. I could see that. I could see somebody
Yes.
definitely considering that being a masterpiece for sure. At least the first one. The sequels are
Yeah,
not.
definitely the first one.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, I
definitely the
wouldn't
first
consider
one.
the sequels. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
funny that we keep
Any.
going towards James Wan of all people.
Yeah,
uh,
apparently, yeah. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I don't
like
know.
this dude has revitalized the horror genre as a whole, and we keep going towards him. But
Yeah, but then he
you
also
know,
made The Nun, which I heard was not good.
he didn't make The Nun. He produced The Nun. He didn't
Oh well,
direct that
same
movie.
difference. Oh well,
He
same
didn't direct
difference.
that movie.
Same
The
difference.
only reason why he was a producer is because The Conjuring was his baby.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why he was producer. The only Conjuring projects he ever did was the first two. He didn't come back for the third one, which I heard was not that great. He didn't do any of the spin-offs. All he did was produce those. So I would say, I don't know. Everybody considers Annabelle Come Home, or not Annabelle Comes Home. Annabelle Creation. Everybody considers that one a master, or like considers that like one of the best spin-offs. And I'm like, it could still be the best spin-off, but it's still a spin-off that is unneeded. I never found Annabelle scary. I found her creepy, but never
Hmm.
scary. And honestly, we can thank Annabelle for doing a lot of things, not great things. The
Well,
creepy doll genre came back, and it's like,
yeah.
yeah, but Chucky did it so much better because it was not afraid to go
Hmm.
campy, and it obviously showed them doing shit. This, it's
Yeah.
just like you turn your head because you hear a noise, and next thing you know, the chair's rocking, but the doll's not there. It's like, fuck off.
Yeah.
That's dumb.
That's the reason why I kind of stay away from those movies as a writer, because like
Absolutely.
to me it just seems like the cliche concepts, like the house is haunted, you need to exorcise the ghost out of here. Like,
Yeah, but I mean,
okay, yeah, but
there
how
are
many
great
ghost
ones.
movies are there? Yeah, I bet they are good, but like
Yeah.
it's just not appealing to me.
Well, I would
Like
argue Poltergeist is one of the best. Exorcist is great, but that's more of a human possession. But if we're going for like
mhm.
the house is haunted, Poltergeist is one of the best examples, in my personal opinion.
I'd
I
go for
think
Monster House.
Poltergeist, Monster House, really well.
Yes.
Yeah, I would definitely. I grew up with Monster House. That is a really
Yeah,
good one. However, I would say the one thing that stops that movie from being phenomenal, some of the writing is pretty bad.
it is.
Yeah, some of
Yeah,
the writing is
yeah, it could
schlocky
be
as all
just
hell.
nostalgia for me, why I like Monster House
Absolutely.
so much.
Yeah. but that is such a genuinely creative idea, and I love
Hmm.
how they came up with the designs for the roar. Is a bunch of like branches cracking and machinery going on. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's actually kind of cool because I did watch the behind the scenes for it. It was interesting, but I would definitely say like if you're gonna go for like the house itself is haunted, that is genuinely, I would say Poltergeist is one of the best examples just because Spielberg was attached to it. There is
Hmm.
so much great effects. It actually is genuinely terrifying, even though minus the fact that it is rated PG. Like there's some genuinely terrifying shit in that movie. Um, and the fact that, I mean, yeah, it kind of did the whole, oh well, now every other haunted house movie is like, well, you accidentally built on an Indian burial ground. All you did was
Right.
move the gravestones. It's like, fuck off, shut up.
Hmm.
But I would argue, again, going back to James Wan, even though I don't consider Insidious a masterpiece, I would still argue Insidious flipped the whole haunting element on its head because it's like, no, it's not the house that's haunted. Because I think it's like maybe 30, 40 minutes in, they move out of that fucking house. And then they go into another one, and that house is haunted. And it's like, okay, there's no way that both houses they pick are haunted. And then they say, no, your son is haunted. And I'm like, that's genius. I love that idea. That is one of the best, like I would argue, twist in that movie. And again, even though it's a PG-13 horror, I would still argue it has some of the best jump scares I've ever seen too.
Hmm.
But
I
I
don't know.
don't consider it a masterpiece. It does fall
Yeah, I
apart in
mean,
the last third.
yeah, because like I said, I kind of stay away from Insidious and Conjuring because to me they just seem a little cliche and amongst. Well, of course, yeah, I will give that Insidious that the sun is being haunted. Yeah, that's a good new take
It's
on
a good,
some
yeah, that's
hauntings.
a good flip on it. Absolutely. Now I
Yeah,
will
but
argue that they did milk that franchise dry,
oh
and
yeah, that
apparently now they're going to do a direct sequel with the son now is like older, and I'm like, okay, that's not a bad idea.
let's not
However,
let's not talk about sequels. I'm tired of sequels.
absolutely,
Everything's
I
a
would
sequel
agree.
nowadays. I'm so tired of them. I'm like, okay,
Uh,
they're like hire
you
me. I
can,
can write
hey,
something new.
hey, hey, thank your favorite poster behind you over there, aka Halla fucking Ween.
Okay, it ended on kind of a sour note with Halloween Ends.
It did,
They could have done
and
they could have done
yeah.
so much stuff with that. They could have just made
If
it
it
so
wasn't
awesome.
here, my thing is if they didn't end it the way they did, and it wasn't the final movie, it would have been received better.
Yes, it would have definitely.
It would have
I
been,
could
and it
have
was
walked
a
out of the
good
theater.
movie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Itself, it was a good movie, but to end the
but as a
franchise, like,
wrap up, it's terrible.
yeah,
I
no,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, and like I love what they did with Corey, but it's like you kind of, because you're introducing Corey and you're kind of doing all this. It's like that just doesn't. It fucks over Michael, and Michael's kind of the
Hmm.
star. So
He is the
why
star.
why
He's the
are you
reason
doing
why we're
this?
back. Yeah, he's the reason why we're
Um,
back.
exactly. He is the star of the franchise.
Hmm.
So it's just one of those things. But basically going back to the modern masterpiece, I still think The Conjuring. I'm gonna have to go with that's my modern horror masterpiece. It's not a film that I watch consistently all the time, but I would consider it a modern horror masterpiece. It is. It's got suspense. It's got great acting. It's got great writing. Yeah, I may forget certain elements of it, but like there are so many parts that I will never forget. So
Honestly, but I think that is something that can't top. I know it seems a little cliche to call it that, but Hereditary, I think, is genuinely a masterpiece.
I would argue Hereditary is a masterpiece to some. It is so incredibly divisive on certain people because they're like, oh well, you know, I heard a lot of people saying like, "Oh, they laughed at that movie because it wasn't scary," and it's like, okay, it has horror though, like genuine horror, and the
Hmm.
acting is fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a slow burn, but that's A24 as a whole. They're supposed to be the high class
I
art.
don't think it was that much of a slow burn because already like beginning of the movie it starts building up some like foreshadowing, especially at the
It
grandmother's
does,
funeral where the sister she's eating chocolate with nuts and she's like, does it have nuts? You know you're allergic to nuts. She's like, no. And she
yeah,
calmly eats the chocolate bar. I was like, okay, I'm already like, what are you doing? And then throughout the
exactly.
movie she keeps
So
trying to
yeah,
eat things with nuts and it's just like
Why?
what the hell are you doing? Until you see the scene in the car. That
Right.
had the biggest shock value I've ever seen in any horror movie
Yeah.
in the longest time.
I would agree. That is definitely one of the most shocking scenes in modern horror.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I honestly, I kind of hate that term. I do hate the term modern horror. It's not my
Hmm.
favorite, but it is still something. It's like it's kind of like cinephile. I hate that word. I
Yeah,
prefer
that's
movie
not
buff.
movie buff. Yeah,
Exactly. But that's the official term is cinephile, and there you go. So
it
I
doesn't
don't think
have to
there
be
is.
official.
It doesn't have to be, but that's usually by the cultural zeitgeist. That is what it is. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of other things that I would consider horror masterpieces, and I'm struggling, man. I still think The Conjuring. You brought up Hereditary. That is a really good one.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think. I'm gonna look at my movies real quick. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm trying to look over at my horror movie collection and see which one of those is belongs up there.
Yeah. Ooh. 28 Days Later.
No,
No, I wouldn't consider
no.
it a masterpiece, but that is definitely a really good modern horror movie. It's what revitalized the zombie genre for me.
Honestly, I wouldn't classify zombie movies to be in horror. I feel like they're their own genre.
I could argue that. Okay, here's one I think we can both agree on.
Hmm.
VHS.
Hell yeah. That's
I
now
would,
that is something that
yeah.
I cannot watch with the lights off. And that's saying
New. I
something.
can't either. I can't
Yeah, and
watch any of
that's
them with the lights off. I mean, don't get me
yeah, and
wrong.
that's
It
saying
definitely makes
something.
you. I would argue the only reason why it works as well as it does is because it doesn't work as a whole. It works in segments, and that is kind of the whole point. It is an anthology movie. Now,
Hmm.
another one I would consider a masterpiece because it's one of my go-to watches for Halloween every year. Trick or Treat.
I think Trick
I
or Treat is a
consider that a
fun
masterpiece.
movie. I think it's a fun movie for sure. Definitely good for Halloween for a Halloween party, or if
Hmm.
you want to do something for Halloween. Trick or Treat and Halloween, those two movies are always the best movies to watch on Halloween.
Correct.
But I don't know if I go as far as calling Trick or Treat a masterpiece.
Hmm. Yeah, I could argue with that.
Um, I can't exactly put my finger why, but when I watch it, I was like, oh yeah, I like it. It was fun, but I wasn't like, holy shit, this was such a good movie, like I did with Saw or Halloween Kills or VHS.
True. I would still argue I like VHS 2 better than VHS 1 just because I found a lot more of the shorts interesting, and also one of the most genuinely terrifying things for me was the aliens in Trick or Treat. And okay, if you don't like found footage, you're probably not gonna like these movies just
Yeah,
because it
no.
is entirely in found footage. But
But
I
as
would still
someone,
argue,
yeah,
yeah,
because as someone,
I would,
I
yeah.
love found footage, and I even try to make my own found footage films.
Mhm.
So,
Found footage
so
is a lot harder than you think. It's
it is.
insanely hard. Everybody considers it cheap. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of cheap
Yeah.
ones out there, and it is
Oh, for
cheaper
sure.
to make them.
It
But
is.
I would still argue that like a lot of those movies, there's a lot more care and effort put into them than you really think there
Oh,
is.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
The
one
only
hundred
one,
percent.
honestly, the one that I think they did it not so much effort on is Blair Witch, and that's just ironic. The fact that that's like the pioneer of
Well, the
found
whole
footage movies.
yeah, and I mean, yeah, you could definitely do that. But I would still say. Would say there is effort put into Blair Witch. However, they got high off their own fumes, basically going off of, well, if you don't see it, it's 10 times scarier because what you don't see is more scary than what you see. And it's like, okay, there is an argument to be made in that.
Yeah,
However, not everybody's
it
going to want to watch just a bunch of people screaming in the fucking woods
exactly. Yeah, that fact is true. The less you see it, the more scarier it is, which is why Alien,
because
The
your brain
Descent,
has to
and
put
Jaws
to,
are
yeah,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
that's why those
Oh,
movies are so
Descent!
good because they show.
The
Yeah, The Descent.
Descent! That's
Yeah,
a good. That's a perfect example of a. I would argue that is a masterpiece. That
I would also argue that that one as well is also a
that's
masterpiece.
a great movie. I love that movie.
Hmm.
I always forget about it, but when someone brings it up, I'm like, oh fuck yeah, I love that movie. That is
Especially
some
the
of the
ending
most claustrophobic suspense. Yeah, the ending is great. I agree.
because then as a
Well, the
writer, that's
original
always
ending.
the original
The
ending.
original ending.
Because
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
a writer, you never want to do that kind of ending because that's just lazy.
Yeah.
But I think the way it was done and like the setting that it's in
Mhm.
makes it work, makes it just more gut wrenching, makes it more unfortunate for her and the audience.
Yeah, we are talking about the one where she's hallucinating a birthday cake and her daughter, right? Right?
The
In the
Descent?
cave, like she's still, yeah, where she's still in the cave at the end. We're not talking about the
Hmm.
jump scare at the end.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about because
Oh
I
fuck
haven't
no,
seen the
that's oh no no no. Watch the alternate ending, man. It's much more heartbreaking
really. Hmm.
because she escapes, quote unquote, but then after that jump scare, it cuts back to her waking up in the cave, and
Yeah.
that quote unquote escape area was those lights, like the like light escaping into the tunnel where it kind of confuses people.
Uh huh.
And so she just kind of accepts her fate. She has like a torch right there, and she like her last visions are her daughter and her celebrating a birthday.
Oh, see, no, I didn't
That's
see that one.
harsher. I
Dang.
like that
Okay.
ending. That ending is a lot better. It fits the movie better because like the movie is supposed to be bleak as hell, and
Yeah,
that's really the
definitely.
whole point. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it kind of negates the sequel, which I argue the sequel is fun. I don't like it, but it's a fun movie. It's a lot cheaper in my personal opinion, but the sequel is a little bit more fun in my personal opinion.
Okay.
It's but it is enjoyable. Um, so I would say The Descent is a modern horror masterpiece for sure. The Conjuring definitely would bring up VHS 1 and 2. Don't watch any of the other ones; they're kind of bad. Uh,
Well, since I liked the first two, I feel like and I watched VHS Viral or not VHS
mhm.
94. I feel like I gotta watch the other ones now. Just
I
buy the whole pack
agree.
and just
Yeah.
try to enjoy which ones, whatever.
Hmm. No. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one that I'm thinking of, Silent
Mm.
Hill.
Ooh. Okay. I could
Because
argue that.
when I left that movie, I was genuinely surprised and I genuinely enjoyed the movie.
I
Like
agree. I enjoy the hell out of that movie.
for sure, yeah,
However, I do. Okay, that is kind of leaning in more towards the video game element of like video game
yeah,
adaptation, and I would argue the video game it's a faithful visual adaptation. I will 100% agree with you on that. But when it comes to story, eh. Um, not to say that the movie is bad. The movie is fantastic. I would if you are a Silent Hill fan, you're gonna love the first movie. Don't watch
oh yeah,
Revelations. It's dog shit. Don't even bother with it. Yes, I know Kit Harington's in it, and yes, I know Carrie Ann Moss is in it, but don't bother with it. It is absolute dog shit. It is not worth watching, and it is confusing as all hell.
it's confusing and
Um,
it's ridiculous.
absolutely. So I would still So do you have your definitive list of like horror, what you would consider modern horror
So
masterpieces?
so you said from 90s to now or 80s till now?
90s to now,
90s till
because
now.
90s is
Okay,
when
so
horror was kind of starting to be overrun and kind of died. Yeah,
yeah,
you had like
definitely.
bursts like Scream. You definitely had
Hmm.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare as well. I would argue that is a good one. I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece though.
Okay. So if I
So
had to pick a few masterpieces, modern masterpieces, mind you, I would
correct.
probably would have to go with I go back to Hereditary, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Hereditary.
Hereditary, VHS,
Mm-hmm. So we'll consider VHS as one category, just VHS
yeah,
1 and 2 together.
mm,
Okay.
okay. Um, The Babadook, not an,
Ooh, that's a good
not
one.
an American film, but a good film nonetheless.
It doesn't have
Like
to be American.
yeah, it doesn't have to be, but see, like I told you personally this one day that I uh divide movies into three categories, which is
Mm-hmm.
movies, which is all for the fun of it, film, which is for the art and the fun of it, and cinema, which is just the art of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Babadook, that one I feel like can fall into cinema, honestly.
It is an artist masterpiece for sure.
Hmm.
When it comes to no, no, I would argue that is damn near a masterpiece. I would argue that
I
for
honestly I
sure.
can't think of anything that takes it out of it being a masterpiece. Like all the elements in there are just great.
Mm.
Soundtrack
Yeah.
elements, the concept, the acting,
Yeah.
everything, man. Even the color palette is just iconic. Everything's so
Well.
bleak, so beige, gray, and black, and dark,
Mm.
and ominous and depressing. So yeah, there's a lot of elements in the Babadook that I think honestly take it back. Hereditary, not so much. Babadook up there, honestly, to be a
Okay.
modern
So you got
masterpiece.
Babadook, VHS, and The Descent is on there as well, I believe.
Um, I'm trying to decide either Descent or Hereditary.
Oof.
Hereditary,
Hereditary.
because yes,
So those
yes,
are your
because
three.
both yes, because even though both movies have horrible, like unfortunate endings, I think
Mm-hmm.
the build up to like there's been like so many hidden messages for the ending
Mm-hmm.
throughout the whole movie.
Okay.
And rewatching it, you're like, oh shit, that's what. So that's what that. Because when I watched it the first time, I didn't watch it in theaters. I bought it on
Mm-hmm.
DVD, and there was like a bunch of like hidden messages of witchcraft throughout the whole movie.
Right.
So because there was always these words on the wall that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they said, and I don't know what they meant. But I googled what those words meant, and each word
Mm-hmm.
was always something to do with witchcraft. So
Oh, okay.
basically, just foreshadowing the ending, without knowing what the ending could even be.
Okay. That makes sense, actually. Yeah. All right. Well, um, I guess my list would be definitely The Conjuring, The Descent, VHS 1 and 2 for sure. Um, Hereditary isn't, it's not my favorite, but it doesn't mean that I can't necessarily call it a masterpiece. I would say,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure. Um, I definitely have Scream on my list for sure. I would argue. I know you hate Scream. I know you don't like it.
I don't
I
hate
know you don't
Scream.
like it.
The first Scream was okay. Just Scream 2022 was just dog shit. That one was so obnoxious. Like I get
Okay.
it, fan toxicity. I get it.
Hmm.
Kill someone already.
Yeah, I
And
would
quit
agree.
the jump scare, the where the boy who was home alone, his mom was the cop and she left, and there was like so many like it's something gonna be behind there. It's gonna be behind there. I was like, okay,
Oh,
that's
you're talking about the tension. They kept
yeah,
lining it too tight.
yeah, okay, yeah. It's to where it wasn't even scary anymore. I was like, okay, it's not gonna happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then it happens a couple of seconds later. I was like, really? I mean,
Yeah.
what are you trying to prove? Are you trying to rebuild the franchise, or are you trying to send a message here? Because that's the one thing I hate is trying to
Yeah.
have a subliminal message in a movie about
Mhm.
society. Like, let me enjoy a movie out of the pure entertainment of it, not because I
Oh yeah.
want to see some social satire in it.
Mm.
If you want to make something about social satire, write a book, make a documentary. There's YouTube these days.
Mm.
Don't waste 2 hours of my life talking with social commentary in a horror movie. Horror movie of all things.
Well, I will say this in Scream 2022. That was not the main element. That was definitely there, and it definitely overshadowed a lot of elements as well when it comes to like fan toxicity and everything else like that. I will agree to that. However, it's also its main thing is like kind of what Scream was before. Scream was basically saying, "Hey, these are all the slashers. This is what works. This is what doesn't work. This is why it ties into what we're doing." All that fun stuff. So, yeah, I would say that they argued that fan toxicity message and kind of shoved it up there into the main message, which is the requel, which is like what Halloween 2018 was doing, like what they tried to do
Mhm.
with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm sure if Friday the 13th wasn't in fucking hell, they were going to try to do that as well.
Yeah,
I mean, like, there's a lot of things that were doing the requel route, and I would argue Texas Chainsaw didn't really deserve it. Halloween did a good job with it at the beginning.
yep.
I would say, honestly, if you really want to have a good time, Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and end it right there. That's it. That's all you gotta do.
Honestly, yeah.
Honestly. Yeah, it leaves on a
Honestly, yeah.
cliffhanger, but there's so many franchises that do that anyways, so fuck it.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure. Yeah, why not?
But I would still say like it is mostly about the requel and how you can write those rules and how legacy characters are always going to you're going to bring back legacy characters. Who the fuck is going to make it? That kind of thing. So I would say, yeah, for sure, that was the main message of Screen 2022. But yet they did shove up that fan toxicity in there because it
Yeah.
was probably being written around the same time that you had all the Star Wars prequel shit. Hence the reason
Oh
they
yeah.
threw a shot at Ryan Johnson, which I would argue was a
Hmm.
fair shot. That was a fair shot. I actually kind of chuckled at that. I was like, all right, I see what you did there. That's pretty
Yeah,
damn
but
funny.
see, because the first Scream already was doing stuff like that about like horror movies do this. You got to do this in a horror movie. Yeah, that was fine. Yeah, but
Yeah,
one time
and
is
it like
fine. Two
breaks the
times is
rules.
fucking
Yeah.
annoying. Yeah, one time is fine. Two times is fucking annoying. Okay.
I would argue that, but I can't help but love it because it did revitalize the Scream, and it kind of changed. It didn't change much. That's what I'm hoping this next one does. I am praying to the gods, the horror movie gods, that this sequel to like I'm hoping Scream 6 does a fan fucking tastic job and changes everything. Not everything, but it
I honestly
changes
I
like
hope so too.
the element Scream. So, and that's what
I hope so
I
too.
feel like that's what we're getting. I really do. I really do feel like we're getting that with this movie.
Too soon to call it. Too soon to
Too
call
soon
it
to
for
call
now.
it. I'm just going off of the trailer for sure. But yeah, on to my list. The Descent definitely would put Scream up there. Like if we're going based off of the '90s, Scream's on there. I would definitely argue The Conjuring, and what was the fifth one I was talking about? Oh, VHS 1 and 2. I
Mhm.
would say those are my five modern horror masterpieces. Those are things that I can't like for some of them I can't just immediately put it on and be like in the mood to watch it. Like
Mhm.
VHS, I could probably watch specific parts, but I wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh yeah, let's watch the whole thing," unless I'm showing it to somebody. You know,
Right.
I'm not that kind of guy. I have to be in the mood to watch that, and I've just not been. Like I watched The Howling for all the way through for the first time today, and I loved it. It was great. Do you want to talk about a bleak ending? Holy shit. Um,
Dang.
wow. But yeah, I have a few other movies that I've been needing to watch, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
But
I
that
still
being
got a lot on
said,
my list
this.
too.
Oh, I know you do. Trust me, I know you do.
Oh yeah.
But that being said, this has been a Snowda Reel. I've been Blackshot56. This has been Awesome Ben Boy, aka my buddy Benji. Be sure to check out his YouTube channel, which I do believe is Awesome Ben Boy as well, if I'm not mistaken. Or is there
Awesome.
7
Ben
Eleven?
Boy 7-Eleven. Yep.
Yeah, be sure to check out his YouTube channel. The video, the his channel will probably have a link in there. And we will see you all in the next one. We don't know what order we're necessarily going to be doing these in. Some of these are pre-recorded, some of them are not. We'll see. Anyways, be sure to also check out the SnodaCast on Saturdays at 7 o'clock CST, Central Standard Time, for those of you that don't know what CST stands for. And once again, I've been Black Chef 56. This has been SnodaReels.